Let's talk about the interior angles of a triangle. You may remember from previous math classes that if I add up all the interior angles of this triangle, they add to 180. We call that the angle sum. In other words, if I add the measure of this angle to the measure of this angle to the measure of this angle, it should add up to 180 degrees. Now, how do we know that? We justify this to elementary students in a number of different ways. One way is we give them a bunch of triangles and say, all right, measure, 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 write down the results, add it up, see what you get. And we have them do that with a lot, and they see a pattern of a lot of them being 180 degrees or close thereto with measurement error. I'm going to show you another way we justify it, and we'll talk about how these are not quite a proof that it's true for all triangles. All right, let's look at this triangle. So one way we convince students that the angles add to 180 is we remember what a 180-degree angle is. It's a straight line. So if I rip off the corners of this triangle, there's a reason I used just some nice blue printer paper rather than something nicer. If I rip those corners off and line them up, look, I get a straight line right here when those angles are all put together. Now, maybe I just chose the perfect triangle for that. You can grab your own piece of paper, cut out a nice little triangle. I recommend using a paper cutter or just making your triangle small. Here's another triangle I cut out. Let's see if it works for this one. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 angles. So I'll line them up again. And I'll see that they make another straight line. Okay, what about, I'll do one more triangle. Let's try it with this smaller triangle. If I rip off the corners and line them up, we get a straight line. Now, you may think, yeah, that's perfect proof that this works for all triangles. Well, I've only shown that it works for 3 triangles. You could prove it to yourself by cutting out your own triangle and ripping off corners. But once again, we've only proved it for the triangles we've tested. How do we know this works for all triangles in the entire universe? That's something we're going to talk about next unit. All right, I hope you enjoyed that demonstration of one way we see that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. We'll look at other ways, but how can we use that to find the interior angles of other shapes? Well, we make triangles. So notice I can break down this quadrilateral into 2 triangles. And that's going to contain all the angles of this quadrilateral. So triangles have an angle sum of 180 degrees, and quadrilaterals end up having 360 degrees because they can be turned into 2 triangles. Now notice I specifically created triangles that only used the angles of the quadrilateral. I didn't try to make any triangles that had angles that weren't on there, but notice that with the interior angles we end up with 2 triangles in the quadrilateral, meaning we have 2 times 180 or 360 degrees inside.